This content is brought to you by Huawei. Typewise is on a mission to make daily lives easier by decoding human thoughts to improve productivity and save you time. Its co-founder, David Eberle, has a love for using technology to its fullest so it could make lives easier for us, for example, with the keyboard we're using on our smartphones daily. Enjoy this video interview directly from MWC in Barcelona. So David, welcome to this episode of talking to you about Typewise and your startup. I'm very excited to get to know you better and get to know your company better and your startup. And I'm very excited, as you know, most investors, what they're most curious in early stages is about the people behind the startup. So that's why we start every episode with getting to know you better. So maybe first tell me quickly a little bit about yourself.
Cool. No, it's a pleasure to be here on your show. So I'm David, as you said. I have a background in business, so I spent about 10 years in consulting and advising bigger companies and their strategy, and that brought me outside of Switzerland in that process. So I spent time in Europe. I spent 4 years in Asia, 2 years in the US.
Oh, wow.
And that gave me, I think, it was a very interesting journey. And I hope to be able to repeat that again of course, with my own company.
So tell me, I mean, like, it's always interesting to see people, you know, who move from like a corporate, let's say this like more risk averse corporate career to a very high risk startup let's say career, if you can call it like that, entrepreneurial journey. But like, can you tell me, like, how was that for you, and like, why did you do this transition?
Yeah, I mean, it took a while. We've had our own company for quite a long time. We did something completely different in the first place. We started out with a marketing agency.
Okay, cool.
And even that was, it was upon suggestion of a former supervisor of mine from the insurance industry, where I had a job as a working student, super well paid for a student. So and he said, hey, you know, you should just charge us for a project. Just make an offer to our company and charge for his product. And I had no company, nothing, but I just sent them an offer. We didn't get it, but not because they didn't like me or it just had different priorities. But that kind of got me in the mood of, well, let's try something else, and you can just build people for it. And then we thought, together with my co-founder Janice, whom I've worked with already during high school, we did some IT projects for random clients that didn't really bring us like super far. It was just little stuff like websites. But then we thought, well, what can we do? We can do websites, and people probably will pay us for it. And at university, I think there was a professor, and she needed a website, so I did it for her, and I got some money. And then suddenly the student club wanted the bigger project, and then I brought Janice in, and we did the project, and we got more money. I'm still like, you know, on a very small basis, of course. But then we saw back in Switzerland that also there were companies needing support, and that's how we at some point founded a company, iCoaching, and we started doing websites, online strategies, and the whole thing became a bit bigger. We hired some students, and at some point we were like 5-6 people at the same time. Mm-hmm. But this was part-time. So this was like, I had a full-time job.
Wow. Yeah. So.
And we never, the thing is, what I wanted is this corporate experience. I wanted to learn from like a professional organization and go abroad. That was super important to me. And I even had picked a company that had international offices and so forth. And so we always continued doing it. Because my dream was like, okay, maybe I have 10 people working for me, but I don't have to do anything for it. But of course, we realized that doesn't work. You have client relationships, and they want to see you as the
show your face
partner. And they have to show your face, and then it gets super time consuming. And we tried bringing someone equal, like as a it wasn't a co-founder back then, but like a partner.
Head of sales, let's say.
Yeah, but we just didn't find the guy at that stage. And then Janice came up with the idea once of the keyboard, and I was sold very quickly because it's
we'll talk about Typewise in a second. I just want to go refer back quickly to what you said before about it was important to you to be in different countries. Why was that so important to you?
I don't know. I mean, I already during studies I had spent half of my studies abroad in two different countries, and I just liked it.
Yeah, very cool. Where were you in Asia?
Well, during high school, I was in Japan, then at the university in Bangkok, and then the masters I did in like Holland.
Okay,
But,
very cool. So let's talk about Typewise. I mean, that's what we're here for, primarily to understand what your startup is doing. So give me a quick rundown about like what Typewise is.
The original idea was to create a keyboard that's made for the mobile phone. With the idea, hey, the keyboard we're using by default comes from the typewriter developed in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. And even then, it was not made to type fast, but it was due to mechanical limitations. And that's how the whole, concept and layout came into being. Mm-hmm. And it's by no means made for touchscreens, typing with two thumbs. And Janice thought about, hey, how would I design a keyboard that's made for mobile phones?
Right.
And that was the starting point. And then, of course, we realized, hey, with the design, or the user interface, you can go that far. But then the algorithms behind it, that's, I think, then the true, there's much more fundamental change possible with great smart algorithms. And that's how we then transitioned from a pure, let's say, app and user interface into like a deep tech kind of venture, and working on these prediction algorithms.
Right. What I'm excited to talk to you about is the milestones you have achieved. Again, you have millions of downloads. So maybe you can tell us quickly, where do you stand today with Typewise?
We have the product on the market. It's the second big, or actually the third big iteration of the product. 1.2 billion downloads so far, over 350,000, let's say, users. We have revenue coming in from paying users. We have a research partnership with ETH in place that now we're looking at taking also to the next level. We've done a pre-seed funding of 1 million last year and are currently preparing for the next round.
Yeah.
And we have a team of about it's 10 FTE spread across 14 people in Switzerland, but also abroad.
Mm-hmm. I want to touch a little bit about these different topics that you said, the interface and then the prediction algorithms. So maybe you can talk a little bit about let's say your learnings in the design of the keyboard. Because again, for me, when I look at keyboard, the ASDF or the QWERTY, whatever you want to call it, that is kind of the main thing, how I imagine it. But what are the other options? How did you think out of the box to make it more usable?
Yeah, I mean, the keyboard, I agree. It's what you know, and there have been already, I think it's about 80 or 90 years ago, there have been new layouts coming out for the computer, or for the computer, for typewriters even back then. But they never managed to kind of become, to get widespread adoption. Because they're hard to learn if you have learned QWERTY in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I think it's this arrangement, and what we found there's an academic model developed by the Max Planck Institute. Okay. It's called Calc, and they have a new distribution for 10-finger systems, and they looked at the letter frequency, and they tried to minimize the traveling distance of your fingers, so that it's quicker. And also they try to make sure that you're always using a left hand and then the right hand, and it's kind of switching between hands as much as possible, so that also makes you faster. And we using that, let's say, model on a small touchscreen, we realized it doesn't bring much value, because the traveling distance anyways tiny.
It's very minimal, yes.
It's very minimal. But the issue is more of the accuracy. That with small keys you have to concentrate, which slows you down, and then you still make mistakes, which slows you down further.
Right.
And there, with this honeycomb or hexagonal layout, you can maximize, let's say, the key sizes, or the distance between the key centers. I mean, that's the trick. I mean, the rest is just an optical illusion in the end. I mean, you can draw circles or whatever. But that's, I think, the key.
Yes.
And that then improves accuracy. And I think that key distance on the horizontal like line, actually 70% bigger with hexagonal keys than what you find on a standard QWERTY. Especially if you add the umlauts, like the Ö, Ü, which are 2 additional keys. The keys get extremely narrow, and that makes it just very hard.
Right.
And I think that's really the thing behind it. We then try to stay as close to the QWERTY layout. We did some experimentation with different versions of it. We're actually re-entered a phase of doing new experimentation with new combinations that may be easier to learn for people on day one.
Right.
Because that's obviously another challenge that we faced from the very first time, that you need to get used to it.
Right. The learning curve.
The learning curve. And that's just really the hard thing, because it is better. Everyone who has learned it, nobody ever said, I did this for a month and it doesn't work. Of course, it always works. It is better. Yeah. But there are people dropping out. Most people drop out at the beginning. It's like a fitness program. If you say, I have to do like 1,000 burpees, of course, most people will even say, I'm not going to start, right? Yes. You're crazy. And that's a bit the thing. But people who did the 1,000 burpees, they're going to be like, wow, now I feel much better. And like nobody would say that was a waste of time. Like, of course, it's good for your health. And that's the same thing.
It's so interesting because, again, look, it so reminds me of a quote. I'm not sure if it's real or not, but that apparently from Steve Jobs, who said, like, sometimes you have to show the consumer what they actually want and need. Because, again, like, this is something that, like, if you ask me, like, do I need a new keyboard? I'm actually very happy with my Swift key, you know, like, it is working really well. But when I tried yours, like, it does have a learning curve at the beginning. You need to be patient. But I do see that, like, you know, the predictions get better and better over time. And that was very interesting, especially also for me. I think what was hard was the new the letters were in different places, so it takes a little bit of time, especially because you're not switching all of your devices to Typewise. So you have only one. Admittedly, for me, it was only one device that had like your keyboard on it.
Absolutely. Although with 10-finger systems, it's a completely different mechanical movement. So I mean, I use a 10-finger system like fluently, and I've never had any conflict of, let's say, if it, like in your brain.
Right.
It's
for sure.
Yeah.
No, it's for sure. It reminds me also like the car manual, you know, or
exactly,
like you're not going to try to stick when you're like an automatic car. Very cool. Now let's talk about the prediction algorithms. I think that is very, very fascinating. So tell me a little bit of what is going on behind, you know, the design of Typewise.
Yeah, I mean, like a keyboard looks, you could say, it's like a little thing with a few buttons that you can press them and that's it. But actually there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and which makes it actually quite complex. I think one complexity, it has nothing to do with the algorithms per se, but it's just all the technical limitations you have in a keyboard from a like operating system point of view. It's not a typical app, but it's almost like an extension that runs in all the other applications, in WhatsApp and in your email and so forth. So it has a lot of, you know, for example, like memory limitations. So everything you do needs to be extremely optimized. Even if you have let's say a 1% crash rate, which many apps have, even Apple software crashes from time to time.
Yes.
In a keyboard, that's horrible. That's like once per day it would crash. And then people, you know, start noticing this because you use it about 80 times per day. So it has a very special requirements as a software. And that also means what it can do on the algorithmic side, it needs to be optimized for that. And the other limitation that comes in is also in terms of privacy, because the keyboard sees everything you do. Also from the operating system point of view,
your bank account,
there's no there's special permissions you would need to ask the user for if you want to have, you know, connect the keyboard to the internet. So the keyboard almost like a sandbox, being isolated, and we cannot access the keyboard itself directly.
Interesting.
Which is good, and that's also our value proposition. So we built everything around those limitations and say, okay, it's quite hard, but the whole AI algorithms we've built, they work within these conditions. And actually we see everything is moving there. I mean, Apple now starts blocking all the apps from accessing, you know, like from tracking people. And that's great because we've already built our business model and our entire analytics around those limitations in the first place.
Cool. I mean, you just gave it away. Like, I want to talk about the analytics. I mean, like, I'm sure you're still generating a lot of maybe even anonymous data. Do you have like any kind of like interesting insights of like the data that you're generating? Can you like say anything about like, you know, the evolvement of languages or the amount of strokes, or, you know, is there anything you can learn from this data?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually I think that's exactly where the limitations come in. So what we see is how people use our app. So obviously the keyboard comes with a parent app, the one you download, that contains all the like the settings and the onboarding and the whole thing. And there we see how people operate. So how they open the app, how they install the keyboard, how they go through this onboarding flow where they maybe break off. The language combinations they use. So also the amount of customization people do. So actually most people don't do a big customization, which is fine. But it also shows that I think we're in the right value proposition of there are many keyboards just giving you different colors and fonts. And I think people probably download these one time and try it out. I think they have zero stickiness. They're not better than an Apple keyboard. They're probably much worse. They just look fancy. But you need a keyboard to type and not to look fancy.
Right.
But we also see that in the data. It's like 10-20% of people who kind of do that customization.
Interesting.
But then in terms of keyboard use, again, it's a sandbox. We don't see what you type.
Oh, not at all.
No, I mean that would be a huge risk.
Sure.
If that's transmitted somewhere, that would be, and that's what we're saying makes us unique, because also then the training of the AI does not require that connection.
Interesting.
And we believe that that's actually the future, and that's our big USP against maybe a technology from Google or from Microsoft.
Right. I mean, Microsoft bought SwiftKey, if I remember correctly.
They did, for quite a substantial amount of money.
Oh, really? How much was it? I don't remember.
250 million.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That was 3 years ago, no?
Yeah, it's 4 years.
Oh, it's already 4 years.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, okay, very cool. So tell me, what's on the roadmap for you the next couple of months and years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff for the roadmap. I think on a keyboard level, we're working towards like a version 4, if you wish. And I think there we have two big things. One is this let's say this learning curve, this onboarding, where we have been working on for some time, and it has gone better and better. So we see better stickiness, but I think there's still. I still think there is this way of kind of cracking it, that it becomes more fluid, that we have this bigger wow effect at the very beginning, and I think it comes a bit too late. And I think we could have much more stickiness still, which would be a breakthrough, I think, also for the consumer business model. And that also comes with what we're working on now is like multi-word predictions. So that it doesn't just suggest the next word that you're likely to type next, but maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 words, the full sentence.
Right.
It's not always possible, but when it is, or when there's a high likelihood, I mean, that's fundamentally like boosting your speed.
Absolutely. I mean, I can see it now in Google Docs.
Exactly.
They do it pretty well, I have to say. They integrate, words that you already typed in these documents from the top, especially on Gmail. If you have, let's say, the first name of the receiver, then this is already predicted, and it's really good.
Yeah.
So, tell me. I mean, I'm interested in the market because, again, like it's hard for me to kind of like fully understand. So I'm happy if you can teach me how you size the market, because, again, like I would say everybody has at least one phone these days, especially in Europe, the US, wherever, Asia probably also. But what is the market for you who are trying to target?
Yeah, for us, again, it's like we have different. You can look at the market in different ways. I think the obvious market is through the app stores. Mm-hmm. And you see you have consumers downloading your product and then going through like a premium conversion.
Right.
And yes, theoretically, it's everyone. Does everyone download another keyboard app? Probably not. but you can look at other keyboard apps. So they have been third-party keyboard apps. Most have been banned because of privacy issues. They were Chinese made. One was an Israeli company, actually.
Okay.
But they have 50 to 100, 200 million installs. So and those are Western installs. So we're not talking about some Chinese keyboard for China, but it was really for the Western market. That's where we operate. And this shows there is a substantial amount of people willing to download a third-party keyboard app. So I think it's almost limitless.
Right.
So when also investors say, hey, but do people really download this type of thing? Yes, they do. So that's number one. Number two is then a way through the OEM smartphone manufacturers.
Yeah.
And that's how also SwiftKey, for example, grew. So they first grew through the app stores and then eventually had deals, how they could further like boost their growth.
They were pre-installed?
Pre-installed. That's obviously difficult. That's clear, but there are also new brands coming out. So I think that's always a good chance of working with them while they're still launching.
Yes.
The other thing is also integrating with other apps. I think that's not really being done, but we have had different conversations, for example, with messenger apps, dating apps, and you integrate directly with them, and they can then provide their users with a unique experience. One, you could offer privacy. Also for dating apps, very important. There are certain ones that are focused on this USP, and then saying, okay, here's an in-app keyboard. Maybe that even has cooler features. You could even have in the dating apps, for example, pre-made responses that they see work well. And there the keyboard sees more. If it's directly integrated with the application, it gets that data from that one application.
Right.
And that could be pretty cool. So I think there's like a third way of growing through, obviously, than the app environment. And then for us, there's a completely different market, which is on the B2B side.
Right.
Also on desktop computers, where we say, okay, we have this technology developed for keyboards, and now we're working on a desktop solution, similar to Google Docs, as you mentioned, but you could use it in Microsoft Word, you could use it in your SaaS applications, wherever, like as a browser plugin, for example, and that's where we see it's a bit like Grammarly in a way, but with a different purpose. Not to help you with your grammar, but to help you be faster, like more accurate. And there are many use cases for it. And for us, that's probably the real growth market over the next couple of years.
Interesting. Because I saw, like, if I remember correctly, you have a freemium version, so everybody can download the Typewise app and install it. But then if you want to have extra predictions or more predictions, you pay a subscription fee.
Yeah, for example. So there are a couple of hooks that we have. I think the biggest one is the multiple languages.
Okay.
So in the standard version, you can type in one language, which is fine for
majority or a lot of people.
A lot of people. But then there's the multi-language capability. And I think that's also something very unique. It's also something that we, have filed a patent for together with the autocorrection, which is very unique in the US, and that's something where people have to pay for. And that's I think it's also the number one driver of why people are paying for the application.
So let's talk a little bit about your fundraising. You briefly mentioned that you've raised already. I think the first time I saw you was at the Zoogler event. That's the first time I think I saw you on stage. Is that possible?
The which one?
From Google, the event at Google.
From SIGTech.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. I think that was the first time I saw you on stage. Tell me what is your fundraising strategy, or not strategy, fundraising goal and timeline? Sure.
I mean, as I said, we did this first round last year. It just fell into I think the pitch you saw was still before the lockdown. We then had an additional. We had 3 pitches in total. That one was the first, and one I think more in Western Switzerland, and then the third one in Zurich again. And that was on that day. The government had announced lockdown for that day.
That was March 16th, no?
Yeah.
Yes, I remember.
We still had dinner afterwards. I think some restaurants were still open.
Last night.
I think they had to close at 10.
Wow.
And then that was it. And
it's like a different life.
And we were obviously a bit scared that, will investors maybe jump off because it was the market crash in the US. Some did. So some didn't. One guy didn't feel well anymore, and I think we never heard back from. I mean, I did then a year later, so he's fine, but he just kind of silenced.
Yes,
that's clear. Some had to focus on their existing portfolio.
Right.
So I think that was probably the biggest challenge, that they said, I need to do follow-on investment and so forth. But on the other hand, maybe the guys who really were interested also had more time. And they were super easy to reach because everyone was home. They could always talk. And so maybe it was a boon and bane at the same time. But it did work out. We then had to do a 6 months gobble up clause where we said, okay, we do a first closing at these conditions, but then we can take on new shareholders into the same agreement at the same conditions for another 6 months. Because of the difficulties. And that was quite good because then after the summer period and more people came on, and then we did the final closing in November.
Okay, very cool. And now what's in the future?
Yeah, I mean, now it's about getting the next round. I think we obviously need to look internationally. I think that's very important, that we get out of Switzerland. Also to get more expertise into the team, also with connections to potential partners. And that's what we're doing now. And I think here again, the question is obviously US, yes or no.
Yes.
So I think we have good expertise in the board. That's obviously helpful. But that's a bit of conversation that we're having right now. It's obviously, it has, again, pros and cons. But that's a bit the current thinking.
And when do you plan another round, or you have no timeline yet?
Towards the later half of the year.
Okay. So in the third part of this interview, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the ecosystem here in Switzerland. I mean, they're in Switzerland. So how do you overall perceive the Swiss startup ecosystem? Yeah,
I mean, I think a lot has happened. I think when we first started a company, that marketing agency I mentioned, there was no, we did it with startup.ch back then, but there was no real talk of tech startups or anything like that. At least we didn't perceive it. And now 10 years later, I think there's a lot going on.
Yep.
I think it's very fragmented. So every canton, has its own program. I think some are pretty good. I think the Innovo, at least from my outside perception, is probably the best one.
Interesting. Okay.
And then, of course, you have the InnoSwiss program, which I think it's very nice. But at the same time, I think it's very a lot of these things are targeted to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Of saying, okay, how do you write a business plan? Although, I mean, who wants to write, or do you actually need one? I think in the US, it's never about business plan writing. And I think it's very geared towards the first stages. And then I'm also not sure how big the ambitions are of the ecosystem. Also, what type of ideas are liked to be seen, and I think the big ideas that are typical maybe in the United States, maybe also perceived as a bit too ambitious, too much fantasy in it, unrealistic, very risky, of course.
Sure.
Too much likelihood to fail, which is true. It's also true for an American company. They maybe have some advantages because they have a huge home market, and we need to go outside very quickly. And as soon as you go outside, you're a foreign company, and it's more difficult to get attention.
Sure.
But still, it's possible. And I think we need to, I would say we need to have these big ambitions, and ideally the ecosystem also evolves more from that very early stage which is important, but also that we get a bigger ecosystem on this. It's not later stage, but it's just like 1 or 2 steps ahead. It's still early stage, but just not very
so
early.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think there we need just more happening in my view.
Sure. And how do you see that, like from for investors? I mean, like you went through one funding round. How do you see or perceive, let's say, the sentiments coming from investors?
I think there's a lot of smart people. That are investing for different purposes. Some are maybe much quite young, maybe even younger than myself, which I think is great. Just saying, okay, maybe I had an exit with my company, and I would like to support, but also be part of some others' journey. And maybe other people have already retired. Maybe they've even inherited money or had a big company or like a big position somewhere, and they also have fun with it.
Yes.
And I think that's very nice. I think I think we have great people who invest their money, then also help. It's obviously, there are some very professional funds located in Switzerland that also invest in the US and so forth, or have like foreign LPs, and I think that's very good. For me, it's still, we're obviously like a small country. So I think it's worthwhile also discussing with investors from abroad, because they may have a different perspective on things, so that they may have a different focus. We obviously have, I think, a lot of companies or like VC funds, at least to my perception, they go into like B2B software. Of course, there's whole like the med tech and the high tech. That's not what we're looking at. But from a software perspective, there's a lot of B2B software happening. On this B2C side, I think there are very few. And it's different. If you look at the Nordics, there are investors that did like Vivino app or Spotify app. We don't have these cases here.
Right.
Of course, we have Doodle, but they had a very early exit. I mean, quite early. And then, now they're just a portfolio company. But I think these cases that we really see abroad, also in France, where they're quite big, big software firms, we didn't really have that experience here. So I think we also don't have investors with that experience and also that willingness to say, okay, we did have a Spotify, and now we invest in another 20 companies similar, because we know maybe one of them will be again another Spotify.
Right.
And that there's this risk appetite for this type of business model, and that we don't really find here.
So let's go into the next topic, which lately I've been trying to be a little bit more vocal about, like mental health for founders, because we see like this is something that is like a lot of people are struggling with it. I hope you don't, but I was saying like it's always good to hear another perspective from people and how they handle, number one, mental health challenges, but also, to stay productive over a long period of time. So maybe you can just quickly share kind of like what it is for you, like the day-to-day running at such a high intensity.
No, I mean, I think it's a very good question. I think it's also something that obviously I've also been feeling that it's, there's a lot of, let's say, pressure, self-inflicted pressure, I would say.
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe it's correlated a bit with a fundraising timeline, that the pressure builds up before, when you have these conversations and you see, okay, this guy wants to see a little bit more there, that guy wants to see a little bit more here, and then you realize, okay, those are the milestones. And obviously you have cash in the bank, but you also know that most likely, eventually, this is going down.
Right.
And that kind of builds up the pressure. And I think that, for me, I think that's really like the correlation. And the question is how do you deal with it? And I think one important thing is to have conversations about like your professional situation, like whatever is happening, that you have people you can talk to. And I find like also an exchange with other founders it's very useful. And because what's really stressful is if you always have to put, everything in the best light.
Yes.
which you do have to do a lot of times. You have to prospective clients, you have to say, hey, this is going great. We have the best thing. And you want to buy from us.
Yes.
To potential investors, you have to say, this company is really going through the roof.
Yeah.
We don't really want you, but if you really must, then...
if you can hold yourself back and you want to write the check.
Exactly. And to your employees, you have to be like, guys, this is really great. And you just need to do a little bit more. But
don't worry about your salary.
Exactly.
It's going to come.
And then you have these other founders, and then they come to you and say, yeah, our company is doing really great, and we have so much interest. And then what are you gonna say? Like
app crashed, like nobody in the bag, someone just left.
And you're also gonna say it's really great too.
So you would hope more of like the transparency, or like the hear about like what it's really like, from the other side.
I think you need that, and you obviously with the co-founder, I think that goes a long way. But you cannot load everything on that relationship. You can, I can talk to my wife, but I also, it's too much if you every evening start talking about it. I think it's not good.
Sure. And it's this roller coaster. I think it's very hard to understand what that roller coaster means if you're not in it yourself. And I know my wife sometimes, like Cedric tells me, she says, Cedric, like sometimes in the morning you call me, oh, we just got a new client. And then like 10 hours later I call, it's like, oh, we're running out of money. And like I got to close down. That's it. Like we're done. Yeah. I think that's hard. That's hard for a spouse to hear. Like,
I'm getting an email every night at 11.
Yes.
The timing is very bad. It's this automated email, and it shows from the previous day the downloads and the revenue.
Okay.
And it's obviously super bad timing.
Because you're about to sleep, or you should be sleeping.
Yeah, and like you should go to bed. Then you get this email. In the best case, it's really good.
In the best case.
In the best case. It's over expectations.
Right.
And that happens sometimes. But then that's also not really great, because then you already know
that tomorrow
is not going to be as good as today, most likely. So you already start thinking...
Oh no!
If it's average, then okay, you just discard it. But if it's below what you want, then you kind of get this sting in your heart, and you're like, and you start thinking about it. Well, I have to do something, and
everything is wrong, or like we question what we're doing,
exactly. And then you take this to bed, and I have to change this email time. But it's not just that email, but I think it's in general. It kind of shows, it just occupies your mind for a lot of times. And I think, one way for me is obviously like exercise and sports. I think that really helps clear the mind.
Absolutely.
Also on weekends, to spend time with my kids and not to open the laptop. It's like really you open that laptop and it's this whole world. It's like entering your mind. It's like flooding your brain with all that stuff. And you see those 20 emails, and you realize, okay, here and there, and it just...
And it's endless. It's endless. You're done with the 20 emails, like you will definitely have more, and it just never ends.
It never ends.
Yes. I also started like exercising much more, and I just realized like this distraction from phone in general. Let's say you go biking and you bring your phone, like it's such a different experience than if you go without your phone. It's just, I don't know, it's so weird. Like, so I bought myself an extra phone just with like Spotify on it, and you can download everything, and then like I go with this, and that's it. So I can still listen to my music, I can still listen to my podcasts, but I'm not getting distracted by by phones, calls, or anything. So
I think what would be a great innovation, it's almost like a profile. Also for your computer. There are ways, of course, today, but they're quite cumbersome. You have to maybe create a new user and log out, and it becomes a bit difficult. But what you could do is, if you have like a profile that you could say at 8 p.m. or you press that button, and then everything, it's hidden. Yeah. The browser is hidden with your work stuff, and if you open the browser, you get like a new window that doesn't have all these tabs. The email maybe hides your work email, so you only have because when I also on the weekends, maybe I want to use my computer for personal reasons, and that's fine.
your charity or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I want to research some movies. Why not? But then you open the browser and you have all these tabs and you see, oh, there's a notification. Oh, let me just quickly check it. And then there's link. Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is really bad.
Really?
LinkedIn, I think, is almost like the new Facebook when you were in your studies and you were like, oh, that guy's always going out, like how does he do it? And now you have like on LinkedIn, like that guy closed a 40 million round and these guys just raised money and they have like just done a 500 million and you're like, what's going on? Like everything is going so great for everyone.
Absolutely.
And that's really, it's really a tough one. And I've noticed I'm opening LinkedIn probably like 10 times or more per day.
Interesting.
It's really bad because I also use it for work.
Right.
They
tricked you into thinking like you need it for work, but then you're browsing and newsfeed and whatever. What I'm using is an app called Freedom. I'm not sure if you heard about it. No. You pay like a one-time $60, and then you can have like these sessions where you say like you block everything and you have like enabled, and it like blocks everything on your computer. You can block apps, you can block websites, you can enable only a certain list of websites. So that works really well for me. But again, like it limits you a lot. You can't do anything, but like that's very good.
That's a good thing.
Very good. So one last question about the productivity. Is there anything like you do specifically, to stay productive? Once you open the laptop and you have all of this stuff, like what is it that you do to make sure you're staying productive?
I mean, we work in sprints every week, and I think on a team level that's very good. I personally struggle with it because I'm involved in different, let's say, teams.
Right.
So I'm doing obviously right now like the business development, and that's like a board, like a Kanban board on its own. I'm involved in the more management, and that's also mostly me, and that's also like a board on its own. And then maybe I have some task in marketing from time to time. Although there I have really taken that I did that in the past when we were still just 2-3 people.
Right.
Then we've obviously hired someone, but I was still very much involved. But now I think we have the second very experienced guy in the team, and now I could really take a step back, which is helpful. But for me, I don't have these sprint plannings. So for business development or also for management, I'm not sitting down on Monday and say, okay, this week, what are the 4 or 5? I just know these 4 or 5 things I should do. Ideally today, and then they kind of stay within to do. And and what I realized is I think it's 2 things. One is to get these work blocks of time where I can, really sit down and do something for like 2 hours, and not always have 20 minutes and 30 minutes and
in between meetings.
Yeah. I still haven't really found, maybe I also haven't proactively thought about ways. I heard from a guy that does like only meetings in the afternoon. Difficult, because I find sometimes meetings in mornings are good, especially with the team, because I have much more focus and energy to spend with them. Sometimes you just can't choose. Or if you have physical meetings, it's maybe better to do it in the mornings because I have travel time, and so I need to be back in the evenings also for the family. So it's like stuff like this. But I think those are ways maybe I could even improve it, maybe by blocking time. Or I know a lot of people say, but then, do you actually do it? It's just a bit weird to put in your like a meeting with yourself, I think. But that's one thing. And then the other thing is when you have such a time, or even if an hour, that I consciously sit down and say, okay, David, what am I going to do in this hour? Because the danger is that, I have time, email. Okay, I did this and that. And then like what often happens, okay, then you need to research something in the browser. You go into the browser.
Then you're LinkedIn. And
then you see, okay, there. And then you suddenly start doing something else. Like, wait a second.
I was actually answering this email.
Yeah. Or you do the email, realize, okay, with this email, I need to like fill out this crazy. Yeah, that's also the thing. Some of these tasks, they take so much time. You want to just answer this investor, but then he sent you a form to like fill out because he said, before we do the meeting, please fill out the form. Then you realize in the form, then they have some crazy attachment that they want to see, and then you have to do that, and then you realize, you can't do it, and then you need to, you don't have the data right away, you need to go get the stuff, and it suddenly takes a lot of time. and then you're not done with it, and your time slot ends, and you have the next meeting.
Sure.
And I think, well, that's why actually sprint planning would be good. So you plan all that stuff, and like that's how we work with developers.
Right.
They say these are the 10 things, and they estimate the time. They maybe spend like a bit of, it's called grooming.
Right.
So they spend a bit of time on each task to see, okay, there I need to code that much, and it's maybe a huge change.
Right.
So you don't just start working on it, and at the end of the week you realize, oh, we're not done, and we cannot release the update.
Right.
Because we,
got stuck.
But with myself, yeah, it's just like, oh, it's just a pain. Do I want to now like go through everything, or rather just get going? Mm-hmm. But is it really the best way? And sometimes it would be great to have someone more senior in your, like that would work on an operational level and say, okay, David, you should, like that's what I had in like consulting. You have a partner, and usually they're quite, I mean, most of what they say makes a lot of sense. Most. And they would tell you, David, this is how you should do it. And that's how you learn a lot. That's how you progress very quickly in these firms. And now, of course, you have the freedom to do everything yourself, which is also great learning. But sometimes it would be good to kind of have someone also on these little things, because those little things, I think they can change a lot. Mm-hmm. And of course, if the board, but I cannot discuss with the board of like how I plan. I mean, this is stupid.
Yeah,
they're gonna think, David, I mean, what are you asking?
I mean, maybe in a one-on-one you can do it.
Maybe.
On a one-on-one, like to get kind of like their advice. So the first one, what's your favorite book and why?
It was called Autography by a Yogi.
Okay.
And what I really liked about it was his faith in how everything would turn out like good for you.
If you can choose between an exit or an IPO, what would you choose and why?
Probably I would prefer an exit, so I could spend time with my family and like just lie in the chair. I think having some time would be great.
What is a successful entrepreneur for you?
I think building good relationships with the people around you is key.
If you think of one reason your startup could fail, what would it be?
No money in the bank.
You're the first one to say that from all the people. What is success in life for you?
Well, I think be happy, and maybe even more importantly, the people you interact with, to make them happy. And the last one, what is the best advice you've ever received or you can give? I think it's really about relationships, that you should, you can fail with your like it's okay to fail with your company, but it's almost not okay to like fail with your relationships along the way. Mm. David, thank you so much. I sincerely enjoyed it. Oh, it was great. It was a lot of fun, and it was great to get to know you better and to hear your insights. So I wish you much success on your continued journey, and I'm excited to watch, at least from the sideline, and I wish you much success. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. You're welcome.